Over the course of 25 years, Resident Evil has put us in the shoes of more characters than we can count. And though there have, of course, been a few duds here and there, by and large the series has had a knack for featuring some truly excellent protagonists, even when the games themselves haven't been particularly good. To that end, here, we're going to rank the top 15 playable protagonists in mainline Resident Evil games. There will be some spoilers ahead, so proceed at your own risk. Before we begin, please consider subscribing and enable all notifications by clicking the bell icon. With that out of the way, let's get started. Number 15. Mia Winters. There's a sizable contingent of Resident Evil 7 fans who are not too fond of Mia, and they do have a bit of a point, seeing as she's lied to Ethan about some pretty big things, been responsible for many of the troubles he went through in Resident Evil 7, and even chopped off his hand. Though, to be fair, she wasn't exactly herself when she did a lot of those things. That said, there's a lot to like about her as well. Unlike her average Joe husband, Mia was a badass agent working for a criminal syndicate, and the part where you play as her in Resident Evil 7 where you're hunting down a bioweapon in a creepy ship with a machine gun in your hands is one of the game's highlights. Number 14. Sherry Birkin. Resident Evil 6 was the game where the series famously went overboard with pretty much everything. The character of Sherry Birkin is a perfect example of that. When we last saw her in Resident Evil 2, where she was also briefly playable, she was a helpless little child. In Resident Evil 6, she's a super agent who can expertly wield any weapon you can throw at her and karate chop hordes of zombies in the face all day long. That said, given her close ties to the series' early days and some pretty solid characterization in RE6 as well, Sherry still manages to come across as a decent protagonist. The fact that she's playing off of a disappointingly unremarkable Jake Muller doesn't help matters though. Number 13. MOIRA BURTON. MOIRA BURTON was an important part of the series' story as far back as the first game itself, where her being held captive by Albert Wesker was a huge motivator for her father, Barry Burton's actions. Resident Evil Revelations brings her to the forefront, though, as a fully playable character, and does an excellent job of it. MOIRA benefits from excellent voice acting and writing. Her backstory and her vulnerabilities make her instantly relatable and likable, and the way she plays off of both Claire and Barry makes her an integral part of the game's story. Here's hoping that we get to see more of her in the future. Number 12. PIERS NIVANS. PIERS NIVANS will always bear the dishonor of only ever starring in probably the worst mainline Resident Evil game, but don't let that fool you. He's one hell of a character. His strong personality and ideals serve as the perfect foil for the fickle state of mind Chris finds himself in Resident Evil 6, and the game does a really good job of selling the camaraderie between the two. PIERS even injects himself with the C virus to kill a massive tentacle sea monster at the end, after which he heroically sacrifices himself to ensure Chris's safety and survival, which means that he goes out like an absolute champ. Number 11. Ethan Winters. Resident Evil 7 took on the responsibility of dragging the series back into grounded horror after the exceedingly high-octane explodey action of RE6, and Ethan Winters was the one who drove that drastic change in tone. Unlike other RE protagonists, who all tended to be highly trained super soldiers or agents, or eventually turn into them, Ethan was just an average guy in Resident Evil 7. His complete disconnect from the series' history and his vulnerability in the face of new threats made him a great choice for a protagonist. Yes, he was maybe a bit too blank at times, and we sure would have liked to know what he, looks like, but hopefully Resident Evil Village will inject a little more personality into his character. Number 10. HELENA HARPER. The common consensus among Resident Evil fans is that Leon and Helena's campaign is the best campaign in Resident Evil 6. And while a lot of that is down to the fact that it's relatively more focused on horror than explosive action, HELENA HARPER also plays a big role in that. Her characterization throughout the game is solid. Her primary motivation of looking out for her sister makes her a character that's very easy to root for, and the bond she forms with Leon as the two progress further into their ordeals is sold effectively by the game's story. Number 9. SHEVA ALOMAR. Chris's dogged search for a Jill Valentine who most believed to be dead was a crucial part of Resident Evil 5's story, and filling the void left behind by his old partner was his new one, BSAA agent SHEVA ALOMAR. Extremely reliable and totally loyal to Chris, SHEVA is a strong personality who almost never flinches in the face of overwhelming odds, and on the few occasions that she does, her character's lent some much appreciated depth. It's a real shame that we haven't seen or heard of SHEVA at all since RE5, because there's no shortage of series fans who would be absolutely thrilled at the prospect of her return. Number 8. Ada Wong. The ever-enigmatic Ada Wong has been fascinating Resident Evil fans and messing with Leon S. Kennedy's head for almost as long as the series itself has been around, and she never fails to leave her mark anytime she's on the screen. Briefly playable in RE2, given a much larger section of gameplay in RE4, and then her own campaign in RE6, Ada has grown progressively more important as the series has grown older, and so far, we're not even close to getting tired of her shady shenanigans. Sure, Resident Evil 6 stumbled in several ways where her characterization was concerned, but on the whole, Ada is one character we're always glad to see more of. Number 7. Rebecca Chambers. One of the OG gang, and yet, sadly enough, a character that Capcom have overlooked far too often for far too long. Rebecca Chambers was an important part of the story in Chris's campaign in RE1, and was of course central to the story in Resident Evil 0. And as series fans would tell you, she's been an absolute delight on the few occasions that Capcom have let her have her time in the sun. She's been featured every now and again in multimedia projects outside of games, but given the fact that she was one of the original STARS members who were there when the whole bioweapons mess started, we're disappointed that she hasn't been a much more prominent part of the story in the years since then. Here's hoping that's remedied in the near future. Number 6. Carlos Oliveira. A year ago, there's no way Carlos would have been high on this list. Hell, he wouldn't even been on this list. In the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, he was forgettable at best and annoying at worst. In the remake, though, his character was probably one of the best parts of what was, on the whole, a disappointing game. Everything from his voice to his personality to his visual design received an overhaul in 2020's Resident Evil 3, and what that resulted in was a character who ended up having a much bigger presence and a much more memorable presence in the story than anyone could have expected. His interactions with Jill were always a joy to watch, his playable sections were excellent, and he was a crucial player in the story from beginning to end. Given the fact that Carlos is still alive and kicking at the end of RE3, we really hope that Capcom takes stock of the strong reception for his character in the remake and decide to bring him back one way or another in the future. Number 5. Barry Burton. Who doesn't love Barry Burton? He was one of the best characters in Resident Evil 1, and his internal conflict of not wanting to betray his partners but being forced to work with Wesker to protect his family was a key element of the game's story. Since then, he's made countless cameo appearances, or has at least been mentioned in subsequent games, while in Revelations 2 he once again took on a major role, even being completely playable. The very definition of both strong personality and family man, Barry Burton is simultaneously the classic action hero that Resident Evil seems to be so fond of as a series, and the relatable good guy that fans just can't help but love. Number 4. Chris Redfield. Chris Redfield is pretty much synonymous with Resident Evil. He's been around since the beginning, and he's still around, and in that period he's been involved in some of the biggest, most pivotal narrative arcs of the series. His rivalry with the one and only Albert Wesker was a joy to follow, and his contempt first for Umbrella and then for the messes that followed in the wake of Umbrella's demise has been the series' backbone on many occasions. The only reason we don't have Chris even higher on this list, in fact, is because, well, his characterization has been wildly inconsistent over the years. Capcom can't seem to decide what exactly Chris looks like, and from being a STARS member to a BSAA agent to a depressed alcoholic to working with Neo Umbrella to punching boulders to now seemingly killing Mia Winters, he's been all over the place. It's almost too much for just one character. Number 3. Claire Redfield. Unlike her brother, Claire Redfield has a cemented look and personality that has persevered over the years across her many appearances. In fact, she's only gotten more comfortable and confident as time has gone on, and it's made fans love her more and more with each new appearance. Even in her debut appearance in RE2, thanks to the training she received from Chris, Claire is perfectly capable of handling herself even in the toughest of situations, and she's only gotten more and more adept as time has gone on. In the Redfield household, there's little doubt in our minds that Claire is by far the cooler sibling. Number 2. Jill Valentine. Like Claire and Leon, Jill is a character that's benefited from consistent characterization, and with each new appearance, she's become an increasingly more likable character. The fact that she was one of 2 playable characters in the series' first game earns her massive points as it is. But on top of that, she's been an impressive presence even in the likes of Resident Evil 3, Revelations, and 5. On top of that, her run-ins with the likes of Wesker and Nemesis, arguably the 2 most formidable antagonists in the series, have only made her stronger. Best of all, last year's RE3 remake delivered what is probably the best portrayal of Jill in a Resident Evil game to date. As far as series canon is concerned, Jill hasn't seen a lot of action since the events of Resident Evil 5, so here's hoping she makes a major appearance in a mainline game that isn't a remake not long from now. Come on, Capcom, she's rested long enough. Give the fans what they want. Number 1. Leon S. Kennedy. The man, the myth, the legend. Leon S. Kennedy immediately secured a place for himself in the hearts of series fans when he made his debut in 1998's Resident Evil 2. And then came Resident Evil 4, with Leon having transformed into a badass super agent, with an arsenal full of roundhouse kicks, suplexes, and cheesy quips and one-liners for every occasion. Even in the much maligned Resident Evil 6, it was hard to find fault with his characterization, and his excellent portrayal in Resident Evil 2 Remake has only served to drive up his stock. Chris Redfield might be Resident Evil's main protagonist on paper, but Leon will always be the most popular character, and for very good reason. And with that, we reached the end of the video. Have anything to say? Let us know in the comments below. Also, we upload new videos every single day on Gaming Bolt, so please consider subscribing as it really helps us out. Thanks for watching.